Wow, I was here yesterday and you weren't here. Whoa, this is awesome. But I have a question for you. Have you ever paid for sex? Now, if you have, please raise your hand. Fortunately, I can't see you very well. But I'm not talking when you pay for dinner and you expect a return on your investment. But have you bought prostitution? If you paid for sex in Portland and she happened to have a tattoo that looks something like this, you might have bought Lacy. This is what child sex trafficking looks like. Brands and tattoos are used by traffickers to show ownership. And let me make this very clear. If you have a child in your life or that you see that has this kind of tattoo, they could be in danger. Lacy was in middle school and a very good student. She was in a church youth group, and she lived just a few minutes from here. Could have maybe walked at one place she lived. Well, her mom was working double shifts at a nursing home. Her dad was in Iraq. And unknown to her mom, there was a man hanging around her neighborhood and her school. Now, Lacy would watch her little brothers and sisters after school, her little brother and 10-year-old sister after school. And was really, pretty good kid. This guy, though, started listening to her, and he'd listen for hours. And then he would tell her eyes sparkled and that she was really pretty mature for her age of 13. Soon, Lacy started considering him her boyfriend. In time, he took sexually explicit photos of Lacy. The first night, she was sold to 5 Johns, who she later recalled to me as old, like her 35-year-old daughter, or father and granddaughter, or grandfather. I'm just turning those upside down, aren't I? Before taking her home each night, her captor would remind her about the pictures he'd taken. And then he would say, I'm going to show them to your friends at school and church. He'd remind her that he knew where he got her and that he would get her 10-year-old sister if she told on him. This went on for weeks, with her living at home, going to school, but going with him to Portland strip clubs when her mom thought she was in youth group. Demand for her became so high that he just kept her one day. She had an exotic look that meant numerous men over 18 months bought this child. He told her, Lacy, you're now a prostitute, and the law says that you're a criminal. And she was arrested several times. But no man who bought this child ever went to jail. And why? Because words have power. And it begins with words. Child sex trafficking has hidden behind language for decades. John, just an ordinary guy, guilty of bad judgment. Prostitute, one day a child, the next labeled by the law as a criminal. No girl wakes up in the morning and says, when I grow up, I want to be a prostitute. I want to be used by men however they want. I want them to jab me any place they like and bloody my nose, knock out my teeth and blacken my eyes, and then go home to their own families. When I grow up, I don't want to marry and have babies. I don't want to be a doctor or a teacher, because when I grow up, I want to be a prostitute. The state laws reflect this deep bias. While we find law enforcement throughout the country trying to treat these kids as victims, the laws criminalizing children in 36 states, including Oregon, speak otherwise, which is why Lacy was arrested. Shared Hope's team has been researching the worldwide marketplace where women and children are sold for whatever sex act the man wants for many years. I presented a lot of this research, but the most impactful to me was when I stood before my colleagues and presented the research on America. And as I started, I just summarized with these words. I looked into the marketplace and I saw us. It wasn't about men coming from other countries. It wasn't about people coming across our borders. It was typical American men buying American children. There's over 100,000 children in the market. The average age they're lured into prostitution is 12 to 14. And Johns are getting more deviant, requiring violent and degrading sex acts that the women in their life will simply not tolerate. The younger she is, the more men are paying. And some kids are still being arrested, while the men who commit this serious crime rarely are charged with that crime. And let's be very, very real here. Portland has more commercial sex venues per capita than any other city in America. And some people are proud of it. So how can we change this? We have to change our laws. For the last 4 years, Shared Hope International has been analyzing the laws in every state and giving their legislators a report card on how well they protect their children. And in November, we will issue our 5th annual report card to each state. When we started, over half the states got an F, and most of the rest got not much better. Now, over half the states have a C or higher. Now, that sounds pretty good at first, but then we did a study on the laws specific to the buyer of commercial sex with children. And we found that many, many states, it was only a misdemeanor to buy sex with a child. So we decided to tackle that, and 4 years later, 48 states, including Oregon, now make it a felony to buy sex with a child. But now let's do the math. With an estimated 100,000 victims who are sold to at least 5 customers a day, it means children are being bought and sold 500,000 times every day in America. And these guys, if they're even arrested, are bargaining down to a misdemeanor and maybe a fine and maybe a few days in jail, if any, even with the new laws. Our research on buyers through the Demanding Justice Project found an increasing number of people getting arrested for shopping for children. But of the ones who were actually prosecuted, we found that in 26% of the cases, they actually walked out the doors after sentencing. And of the rest, if they got any time in jail, 85% of their sentences were suspended. That just means they didn't serve the time. And yes, 99% were buyers, and they were men, or men who were buyers, and their ages were 18 to 89. 65% of the buyers held positions of authority and trust, and 56% worked with children directly. And you're thinking, Why aren't they going to jail? Well, again, we need to look at us. When we talk to prosecutors about this and we ask them why they were bargaining down so low on these serious crimes and not taking these cases even before a jury, some of them said because they didn't think 100% of the jury would actually see the exploitation. Some will only see a prostitute, and some, a John, who might look like their son, their husband, or maybe their father. We are the jury. So how do we change this injustice? Well, first, we have to change our own perception. None of us ever thought it was about girls like Lacy. We thought it was about adults making adult choices. But our perception influences our words and our actions, so we have to start here. Next, we change our language. The words we use direct the future we want. He's an exploiter, a serious child predator, a criminal and danger to society, and he's just not worthy of the good name of John. Lacy is not a prostitute. She's an exploited child, a victim of a series of horrible crimes committed by numerous people. And she's often even ignored by our society. I know sometimes it's hard to make changes, but we have done it before. For decades, women would cry out for intervention and protection from violent husbands. These incidences were called domestic disturbances. Only when it got so loud that the neighbors called the police would the police come and knock on the front door, and they'd ask the occupants to stop disturbing the neighbors. And when body bags started coming through those same doors, we were finally able to shine light into the crime of domestic violence. There are now domestic violence laws across the country, and they require intervention and protection for victims of domestic violence. First, we change our perception. Then we change our language. And next, we change our laws and we enforce the ones we have. Just a few weeks ago, there was a really strong message sent across the land. Don't mess with Tennessee. They changed their law just a few months ago and immediately arrested somebody. He just got 22 years for shopping for sex acts and offering to pay $5,000 if he could get a 12-year-old girl. Now, if you think about it, if I were a John, I probably wouldn't shop in Tennessee, but he could come to your state. So make sure that your state gets an A on their report card, that you support your prosecutors as they enforce the law, and send that same strong message. Our state is not open for business. If there weren't a buyer, there wouldn't be a child snatched up by a trafficker for the market the buyer has created. And finally, we change our own response. When we can spot the signs of trafficking, we can protect our family and friends. When more people just know, the world becomes a smaller place for people who would buy and sell sex acts with children. So here's what to look for. First, an older boyfriend that she keeps a secret, even from her best friend. He has no job, but significant wealth. She has a new item that's expensive, like a new expensive purse or piece of clothing. She's sporting a sign of ownership, like a tattoo of money or a name, or maybe a special symbol, which is how the pimps show other pimps that they own them. She might have bruises, cuts, and burns that she tries to cover up and hide. Knowing these signs saved the life of a girl in Southwest Washington. Her teenage friend had heard about trafficking from his father, been taught the signs, and when he spotted it, he actually reported it. This story has caused us to create the film Chosen, but it really is just a resource that teaches youth about the signs so they can protect themselves and their friends. So let's change our perception, change our language, change our laws, change our response, and let's start today. First, let's send men who would shop for girls like Brianna and Lacey a Dear John letter. Let's let them know that we've discovered their true character and won't let them get away with violating our children anymore. You can join me if you want. Dear John, we're on to you. If you pay for sex, you might get a child and be guilty for your role in child sex trafficking, the abduction, rape, and slavery of children. So hear us when we say, if you shop for our children, we will see that you get the justice you deserve. Sincerely, us. Right now, if everyone in this room and everyone online goes to demandingjustice.org or Shared Hope's Facebook or Twitter page and you sign it and then share or retweet this message, we can be a mighty voice of justice for America's children. And while you're at it, send the signs of trafficking to your own family and friends. Thank you.